Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm Paul, I'm with the Dicey Review, and today we're going to be learning how to play the 1 to 4 player game Auztralia, being released by Stronghold Games. Auztralia comes with all of the components that you see here, including 4 player boards, 1 game board, 40 Old One cards, 15 total solo and 2-player variant cards, 30 revelation cards, 10 in each level, 1, 2, and 3, 36 personality cards, 35 Old One tiles in 3 different levels, 1, 2, and 3, 1 combat marker and 1 combat token. The players can choose to use either one of these. 13 sanity tokens, 8 spawning tiles, 20 survey tiles, 50 each of the 3 different resources, iron, coal, and gold, 7 phosphate, and 10 Old One damage cubes and 1 Old One disc. The game also comes with a number of different components in each of the 4 player colors, 17 victory point tokens, and an assortment of different military unit tiles. To begin setup, set up the board with Eastern Australia showing. Then each player will select a color and take the player pieces in that color. Each player receives 7 of each type of farm, 20 railroad tiles, 3 discs, 20 cubes, 1 port marker, and 1 player board. Make sure that the player board is on the side showing the Eastern Barracks. Then place all of your cubes in the HQ box. All of the other remaining player pieces can be left next to your player board. Then place each type of resource as a supply near the board. The resources are coal, gold, iron, and phosphate. Give each player 2 iron, 2 coal, and 4 gold, which they will place on their player board in the warehouse space. Each player then takes 3 sanity markers. Remove the 8 Old One tiles with 1x or 2 x's on them and set them aside. Then sort and shuffle the remaining tiles into 3 stacks of level 1, 2, and 3 tiles. Shuffle each stack and place them face down near the board. Shuffle the 20 survey tiles and place them face down near the board. Then draw and place 1 face down on each survey space of the game board. After you're done, it should look like this. Then flip the tiles face up, making sure that the arrow on the tile is pointing up. Any leftover survey tiles can be placed back in the box. Then populate the areas around each survey tile based on what the survey tile shows. Each Old One symbol means that an Old One tile must be placed. So for instance, this hex would receive an Old One tile because this survey tile shows an Old One symbol in this space. The level of the tile placed would be a level 1 tile because the hex itself is a level 1. Old One tiles are always placed face down. There are 3 different types of hexes: coastal hexes, hill hexes, and outback hexes. It's important to note that Old One tiles can never be placed in coastal hexes or in hill hexes. So for instance, this survey tile shows an Old One tile being placed here, but since it's in the hills, this tile would not be populated. It's important to note that each hex can hold more than 1 type of resource or more than 1 type of tile. For instance, this hex has an Old One from this survey tile, and it's also going to show 3 gold being populated from this survey tile. In this instance, the 3 gold would be placed with the Old One tile. It's also important to note that no resources may be placed in coastal hexes. So even though this survey tile shows 3 gold being placed right here, this is a coastal hex, so these resources would not be placed. In some cases, there may be overlap of more than 1 Old One being populated in a single hex. If more than 1 Old One is supposed to be populated in a hex, you will simply upgrade the Old One to the next level. So for instance, this hex is supposed to spawn 2 Old Ones. Instead of doing that, you will simply spawn a level 2 Old One, as this is 1 level above this hex. If you run into this situation and the tile is already a level 3, you won't upgrade an Old One or place another one. You will simply place a level 3 tile. Remove all survey tiles after populating the board. Separate the revelation cards by the numbers on their back and shuffle each deck. Then form a deck of 15 cards with the 5 level 3 cards on the bottom, 5 of the level 2 cards on top of that, and the 5 level 1 cards on top. Shuffle the personality cards and deal 5 face up to form a display. Then place the remaining cards to the left of the display as a draw pile. Shuffle the old one cards and place them next to the board. Then place the purple old one disc on the 22 space of the time track. Place the military units in stacks on the designated board spaces. Then randomly determine the first player. Each player places one of their discs on the correct space of the time track depending on the player count. The first player's disc will be on top. Make sure and place all other components such as the combat marker, sanity tokens, victory point chips, and old one damage cubes nearby. Finally, in reverse turn order, each player places their port disc in a coastal hex that has a port symbol. No port can be within 2 hexes of another port. Auztralia is a military and economic adventure game for 1 to 4 players. Players each have a port tile on the main board, and a player board that represents all of the resources and military units in their port. Players will build railways originating from their ports out into the Australian countryside to collect resources, build farms, and combat old ones. Each railway that is built requires coal and iron, and the best way to get these resources is to expand and mine them using your rail network. Farms will provide players with gold and points, but farms can be attacked by old ones in the hinterland. When a player's disc is the lowest on the time track, they become the active player and can take an action. Each action has a time point cost, which is paid by moving your disc on the time track. When the action of the active player is resolved, the new lowest player on the time track will take an action. At a certain point in the game, the old ones will activate and begin to take turns to combat the players. Old one tiles will turn over and begin to move towards players' farms and ports to attack and blight them. Players will have to work together to combat powerful old ones. When a certain number of time points has been expended by each player or a port is destroyed, the game will end. Players will then compare the points they received from farms, defeating old ones, and collecting personality cards. Old ones will also score for how many of them are left in the farms they have blighted. Whoever has the most points, either a player or the old ones, will win. The player whose disc is lowest on the time track will take a turn. If there's more than one disc on the lowest space, the disc on top will take a turn. On a player's turn, they will take one of the cubes from their HQ and place it in one of the action spaces on their board to take an action. Each action taken will have a time cost associated with it. When you complete an action, you move your disc on the time track the appropriate number of spaces. You can take an action that you've already performed, but a player must pay 1 gold for each cube that is already present in an action space. So if a player wanted to take this action again, they would first have to pay 2 gold, and then they could place their 3rd cube there. Players will be able to take an action to retrieve their cubes later. On their turn, a player can take one of 8 actions. Let's take a moment to look at each action in detail. The first action a player can take is to build a railway. There are 2 railway action boxes that allow you to build rails on different terrain types. For 2 time, 1 coal, and 1 iron, the player can build 2 railways on coastal and outback hexes. For 3 time, 1 coal, and 1 iron, a player may build 2 railways in any terrain type. When placing railways, you place them on the lines between hexes. These tokens show that these hexes are now connected by this player's rail network. Rails must originate from a player's port disc, but can then be connected to other previously placed rails of your color or the port disc. A hex can have rails from multiple players connected to it, but each side of a hex can only have 1 rail token. You can never move rails once placed, and to be able to expand your rail network, you have to be able to trace a path that is free from old ones back to your port via your existing network. You can never build into a hex containing an old one tile. The next action a player can take is the mine action. To take a mine action, a player takes all of one type of resource from a hex they are connected to by their rail network. They will place the gained resources in their warehouse. The rail line from your port to the hex with resources must be free of old ones. If more than one resource type is in the hex, the player picks which resource to mine. If a player takes phosphate, they will also gain 1 gold. Phosphate is worth 3 points at the end of the game. The next action a player can take is the import-export action. The player can perform these 2 sub-actions in any combination they wish. Importing allows a player to take 1 coal or iron from the supply and place it in their warehouse. Exporting lets a player sell 1 coal or iron from their warehouse to the supply for 1 gold. The next action a player can take is the recruit help action. The recruit help action allows a player to take 1 personality card from the display. After doing this, the players will shift the remaining cards to the right and draw a card to fill the empty space. Alternatively, with this action, a player may pay 1 gold to draw the top 2 cards of the deck and select 1 to keep. Then place the card they didn't keep back on the top of the deck. There's no hand limit for personality cards, and you can play as many as you want on your turn. The next action a player can take on their turn is to buy a military unit. To buy a military unit, the player pays the cost of the military unit in gold. They will then take the unit tile and place it in their barracks. Players can only buy 1 military unit per action with the exception of infantry. 2 infantry can be purchased per action. The next action a player can take on their turn is to farm. There are 3 types of farm tile: corn, sheep, and cattle. You can place at most 1 farm of each type per action. So with 1 action, you could potentially place 3 total farms that are all different. Farms can be placed on territories that match their symbol. So for instance, these 2 farms could be placed on these 2 hexes. A player can place farms on hexes connected to their rail network, and the hex must be completely empty of any resources, tiles, or ports. The path between your farms and port must be completely free of old ones. In other words, your route back to your port can't have any old ones blocking it. The action will cost 1 time for each farm placed, so if you place 2 farms, it will cost 2 time. The player takes 1 gold for each farm placed, and once a farm is placed, it can't be moved. The next action a player can take is to attack. The attack action has a number of steps to consider. The players start by deciding how many military units they want to send out as an expeditionary force. Select some or all of the units that you've purchased and place them on the matching spaces of your expedition area on your player board. Stack them there if there are more than 1. Your expeditionary force will have an attack range. The range of your force is equal to the lowest range among all of your units. So in this instance, the armored car has a range of 2. This entire force has an expeditionary range of 2. You can attack face up or face down old one tiles that are within attack range of your rail network or port tile. So in this instance, the old one tiles that are in these 3 hexes are within range. You can't use a railway hex as a basis point for a launched attack if there's an old one blocking your path from the port. Essentially, you can't move through old one tiles on your rail network. If you're only using airships, you can. They break this rule and can fly over old ones. So for instance, if you were using only land forces, you wouldn't be able to use this hex as a launching point for an attack, because this old one is blocking your route to your port. Players can use their selected attack marker to mark which hex they are attacking. And if attacking a face-down old one tile, players will flip the tile face up. Players can also attack old one tiles that may be on their rail network. Armored trains can be especially useful at attacking in these situations as they have no off-rail range. The time point cost of an attack depends on the types of units in your expeditionary force. An attack action will always cost a minimum of 1 time and a maximum of 3 time. Only units in the top row of your expeditionary force count when determining time point cost. The action will cost 1 time for each different unit type in the top row used. So for instance, if you use infantry and armored cars, the time point cost is 2. It's also important to note that it doesn't matter how many of one type of unit is used, it still only costs 1 time point per type. So for instance, even though there are 2 infantry, they will only cost 1 time point in an attack action. Armored trains and airships have no time point cost when combined with the top row units. But if you just attack with airships and armored trains, you still must pay at least 1 time. We'll look at how combat is resolved in just a moment. The final action that a player can take is to retrieve their cubes. To take the Retrieve Cubes action, a player simply takes all of the cubes back from their action boxes and places them in their HQ. This includes the cube used to select the action, and if you have no cubes left in your HQ, you can retrieve them all at a cost of 2 time. Now that we've looked at all of the actions you can take, let's look at how to resolve combat. Combat will occur if you take an attack action or if an old one moves into your port space. At the start of every combat, a player will take 3 sanity tokens. This is their sanity supply for the engagement. If a player is attacking a hex with a face-down old one, they will first flip the old one tile face up, and they then have the choice of engaging it in combat or withdrawing from it. If a player engages in combat, they will follow this pattern. First, they will turn over the top card of the old one deck and check to see what's to the left and right of the monster symbol that you're attacking. Symbols on the left side of the monster indicate which types of units will damage it. For each matching unit type that you currently have in your expeditionary force, you'll do 1 damage. It's important to note that it's the type of unit and not the number of each unit that determines damage. So for instance, if you have 2 artillery, you will still only do 1 damage in this situation. If you do any damage to the old one, you can place one of your color cubes on that tile to indicate the damage. The right side of the cards will indicate damage that the old ones do to your forces. If the old one you're attacking has a cube to the right of its symbol, it does 1 damage to your expeditionary force. You choose one of the units in your force and place a purple cube on its tile. If you place damage cubes on a tile equal to its health or defense value, you remove that tile and place it back in the supply, and the cubes are removed. It's important to note that you can't place the general damage cubes on your airship. There's a specific symbol on the card that will indicate damage for airships. If there's a sanity symbol showing on the right side of the card next to the monster that you're attacking, you must lose 1 sanity token. If you have no sanity tokens left and you need to lose 1, then you are defeated. It's important to note that all damage on Old One cards is assessed at the same time. After the Old One card has been assessed, you'll check to see if you've been defeated or if the Old One has been defeated. The Old One is defeated if the total damage inflicted on it is equal to or greater than its defense value. If you're the only one who damaged an Old One tile that was destroyed, you take the Old One tile for in-game scoring. If more than one player damaged the Old One, the players divide the points evenly among all players who damaged the Old One. Take victory point tokens and give them to the players to indicate this. Any remaining points after dividing are given to the player who damaged the Old One the most. If players are tied for the most damage, they evenly split the remainder if possible. And if this isn't possible, then the remainder isn't given to anyone. Players will then get their cubes from the Old One tile back and place them in their HQ. If all of the Old One tiles from the hex are destroyed, then the combat ends. A player is defeated if all of the military units that they selected in this expedition are destroyed, or if they have no sanity left and need to lose 1 sanity. If a player is defeated, destroy all military units in their expeditionary force that have 1 or more damage cubes on them. Then return your other units to the barracks. If you simply withdraw from a combat, your damaged units are not destroyed. Before drawing a new Old One card and continuing in combat, you have the option to withdraw units from your expeditionary force. You can choose to withdraw all of your airships, all of your non-airship units, or all of your units completely. If any of the withdrawn units have damage cubes on them, remove those cubes and then return all the units to the barracks. If your port is being attacked by the Old Ones, combat is resolved in almost the same manner as a normal attack. The main difference is that this doesn't cost any time points, you can't withdraw, and all of your units have to be used to defend. If after combat is completely resolved, any Old Ones remain on your port hex, you lose your port and the game ends immediately, and scoring will then begin. It's important to note that if you eliminate all the Old Ones at the same time that you're defeated, you'll still have all your units destroyed, but you don't lose your port. The game will continue. Remember that Old One cards are resolved simultaneously. And finally, if you're initiating combat in a hex with more than 1 Old One, you have to fight all the Old Ones in that hex. You can't just choose to fight one. You'll use the same Old One card to resolve combat for each Old One present. Each one will be handled as an independent combat. And if there are two or more old ones of the same type, any damage you inflict on them will be inflicted on each old one. So for instance, if I were using my armored car to fight these two Migos, I would do 1 damage to each one with my armored car. The same is true, however, for the damage that the units will inflict. If there's more than one type of the same unit, and they would inflict damage, they will double that damage. So in this instance, these Migos would each do 1 damage. This is also true for sanity loss. When every player disc has passed the purple disc that's waiting on the number 22 space of the time track, the old ones will become the active player. This process will follow a few steps. First, the old one's disc will move 1 space on the time track. If the purple disc moves to an illuminated space that has the highlighted symbol on it, 1 revelation card will be drawn and resolved. And then old one movement will occur regardless of if a revelation space is activated or not. It's important to note that there have to be face-up old one tiles on the board for movement to occur. When you reveal a revelation card, you will simply follow the text on the card. For instance, this card tells us to turn face-up the old one tile in the lowest numbered hex on the board. When determining numbers for this step, you will look to the numbers in the bottom left of each hex. So in this example, this old one would be turned face-up. If you reveal a tile from a revelation card and it shows the kangaroo, you would remove this tile from the game. Otherwise, the tile is left in position. To check whether an old one moves, first reveal an old one card. Any old ones that are in the highlighted white circle will move. All old ones of that type are then moved 1 hex. An old one will move towards the closest port or unblighted farm. If there's more than 1 port or farm that are an equal distance away, you will check the number on the top of the card. In this instance, it's a 4. You'll then refer to the compass on the bottom of the map and move the old one tile in the direction that matches the number on the top of the card. In this instance, 4 would move this tile straight down. So it will move this way. If the direction given on the card wouldn't move the old one tile close to one of the 2 equally distant discs, then you'll instead pick one of the discs that's closest in counterclockwise or clockwise direction, depending on what arrow is on the card. In this instance, the direction would be clockwise. So, going clockwise from this old one tile, you would select this port disc and move it in this direction. You have to carry out this movement check twice each time the old one disc is moved on 1 space. If an old one moves into a hex that has a farm, the farm will immediately be blighted and turned face down. Railways aren't affected by old one tiles, except that old ones will block railways for certain actions. If there are any damage cubes on an old one when it's moved, the damage cubes will stay. And if an old one moves into a port hex, combat will occur as described earlier. The game will end immediately when one of these 2 conditions occur. If all discs, including the old one's disc, have reached or passed 53 on the time track. If a player has reached or passed 53, they can't take any further actions. The game will also end immediately if one player has lost their port to the old ones. The players will then calculate their points as follows. Each non-blighted farm is worth 2 points. Each phosphate in hand is worth 3 points. Some personality cards will give you bonuses. You'll gain victory points for each old one tile that you have defeated, and each victory point chip that you have in hand. Each revealed old one tile still on the board is worth the number of victory points indicated on it. Each unrevealed old one tile is worth double the number of victory points indicated on it. And each blighted farm is worth 1 victory point for the old ones. The player with the highest total is the winner. It's important to note that this might be the old one. If a player ties with the old ones will win, but if players tie, the tied players share the victory. Alright everyone, that was our video. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that it was helpful and we hope that it was informative. If you still have any questions about how to play the game, please comment below or email us directly at thedicey@gmail.com. If you want to hear more from the Dicey Review, you can listen to the Dicey Review podcast. It can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, SoundCloud, pretty much any podcast app. If you want to read our written reviews, you can go to thedicey.review.com and make sure and connect with us on social media or at our Board Game Geek Guild. Thanks so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you at the table.